So I was recently recommended to check out a YouTuber called ContraPoints and their critique on capitalism.
When you look into the pools of the 9/11 memorial at the World Trade Center, you start to ask yourself questions. Why is the world bad?
I don't think that ContraPoints acknowledges or understands the real world, although they mean well and they have such good intentions and stuff like that. Their intentions have disastrous consequences. There just is no such thing as perfection. You're always going to have good and bad people in this world. And so it's the same with politics and economics. There's no such thing as this perfect system. You've always got, corruption and exploitation. So it's all about how you limit these problems. That's what it's down to. It's a question of what system best works to limit these problems of things like exploitation, of corruption, of crime, etc., etc.
What did all these people die for? For freedom, I guess. And American values? But what are those values? What kind of freedom is it that we have?
It's kind of difficult to say in today's standards because across the United States everybody has their own view of the way things should be. You've got a group of people who believe in, socialism, and then you've got a group of people who believe, in the conservative values, and then you've got those who believe in libertarianism like myself. It's true to state that what America was founded of was defending individual rights and individual liberty. And the reason being, you've got the Constitution there as evidence. To become the United States, what they fought for was basically the freedom from British mercantilism. British mercantilism was basically an old type of corporatism. In other words, you saw the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Act a year later, which was basically a replica of the Stamp Act. And then in 1773, the British tried to impose the famous tea tariff. And these protectionist tariffs is all part and parcel of this protectionist anti-capitalist system. Of course, mercantilism in Britain. And so this is what the American people were fighting against. It was actually the American capitalist merchant class who formed the Boston Tea Party to spark what was, of course, the American Revolutionary War.
The 9/11 memorial shares the World Trade Center site with the largest shopping mall in Manhattan. There's a Forever 21, an Under Armour, a Kate Spade, and a pair of shoes that I want, but they're too expensive and my feet are too big and I'm too tall to wear high heels anyway.
This particular individual does not understand about prices, does not understand what profits are. Most importantly, you'll find that, ContraPoints doesn't understand what capitalism is. Immediately into this person's video, they have touched upon this shopping mall in New York. Now, New York is somewhere that we know is very expensive, and the United States of America today is strongly corporatist. I mean, the entire private sector across the American economy is over-regulated.
Just to put it in perspective, we have $2 trillion in regulation every year, and fraud and waste cost us another $1 trillion.
Well, the regulations, I was talking to one businessman who was frustrated, so frustrated he gave up one of his business proposals because he said it's like trying to run through thick molasses. It's the most frustrating thing in the world. And coming out of the recession we had, yes, it was a bad recession, but you don't come out of a recession by making it more difficult to do businesses. We increased the regulations coming out of this recession.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And just take the IRS, 74,000 pages of regulation. That's 3 stories high.
The deregulation that was carried out under Ronald Reagan was so minute on the grand scale of things that it barely even touched, it was like a drop in the water of the ocean. That's basically what it was like. Yes, he did carry out some deregulation. It's the same with this Donald Trump. Donald Trump would have carried out deregulation, but it's nothing like as if to say, oh well, they've moved somewhere from, this extremely high government regulated economy to this, low level government regulated economy, because that just is not the case. What ContraPoints is saying is that, you've got this shopping mall, you've got, all these big name stores, and this is the key point here, right? They're these big named, stores, big brand names, right? ContraPoints questions why a pair of shoes in the window is too expensive. That's like me going to somewhere like Fraser's on Buchanan Street in Glasgow. The type of store that sells a £500 tie or a £400 belt or something, just ridiculous prices that you kind of think to yourself, who the hell would waste their money on such crap when you can get the same thing cheaper for elsewhere? That's the point that this particular individual has just missed out. No doubt, the same pair of shoes somewhere else, although not brand name, you could probably get just as good, if not better, a good pair of shoes without the brand name in some, store elsewhere in the city for far cheaper and for, just better value. But this is the other point, because like I mentioned, the United States is sitting under this massively corporatist system, right? It's not a capitalist system. This particular individual, ContraPoints, has more or less painted it black and white as if to say capitalism is corporatism. No, it's not. It's not even remotely the same thing. It's anti-capitalism. And there is a strong difference between that of political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. For example, and I've gave out examples in the past of the difference between your Edward Collins to that of your Cornelius Vanderbilt, or for example the difference between what the North Pacific Railroad Company was like to that of, someone like James J. Hill. If you are against the free market system, you are not in favour of a capitalist system. It really is as simple as that. It doesn't matter if you come out and say, somewhere along the argument that, oh well, this will always happen or that. Well, at the end of the day then, you're not in favour of a capitalist system, because the capitalist system is about individualism. And I have pointed this out to you folk umpteen times. The definition of individualism is so clear. It basically and simply means the separation of the economy from government intervention, where individuals are free to pursue their own economic goals and paths, and are free to go and choose what they wish to do. If they wish to go and work in a collective group and work together, and or work in some business, for working for some other company owner, that's their free choice. Or if they want to go and start up their own private business, that's their own free choice. So this is the point. The other thing that I wish to address here is the fact that prices are signals, and this is another thing that ContraPoints, like I say, this person means well. They have all these good intentions and stuff, but they don't seem to understand, individuals like this don't seem to comprehend that prices are signals. They're not obstacles to getting things that you want. So the higher price in the market can be a signal there in the market to say, here is where there is a shortage. But it may not particularly be that. It might be a case that, let's say those pair of shoes in the shop window were about $400 or something like that, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, oh, it's too expensive for me. But, at the end of the day, the company gets away with, charging that price because obviously they're able to sell it to a specific market. That's that business's own free choice. When you start up a private business, you have to think about your niche. What's your demographic? Who are you going to sell to, right? It was that private company's owner, that private company owner's choice over who their market was going to be. that particular individual who runs that particular business obviously aimed at a market that was higher priced, aimed at people who have money. So, for example, a company like Fraser's, right, producing, £400 belts, etc. This is obviously a company that's high end, that's producing, high, priced items with this brand name, etc., and selling to the wealthier type of people. That was their niche in their market. You have to plan out, who are we producing for? Are we producing for the elderly? Are we producing for the younger? There's many issues regarding who your niche is going to be, but this is it. Who are you producing for? Is your business aimed at people who are rich, or is it aimed at people who might not be able to afford the same? You see, all of these things you have to take into account. This particular individual has completely ignored the fact that there's so many hundreds of other stores out there that, sell, similar items for much cheaper, for a cheaper end of the market, and aim at a different niche. The point being here is the fact that this individual who runs the big end store, that's their free choice over what they wish to do. If they wish to outprice the average consumer, that's their free choice. I can actually give you a prime example, and I don't care if people slag me for it or not, because I'm not one of these people who gives a damn about all these brand names. Oh, it has to be Levi's, or it's it has to be such and such. It has to be Fred such and such. I don't know all these brand names. I don't care. All that nonsense doesn't mean anything to me. See, if something looks good and I would like to wear it, and it cost about £10, I would still go out and buy it. There are companies like that. Matalan is a company much like that. It sells some pretty decent clothes for, a relatively far cheaper price that goes on sale. But here's the other thing you have to take into account, is the very fact that, see, if a company does set a higher price, and let's say the product is not selling, that forces the company to reduce their costs. Another issue here is that, like I said, prices are signals, and a higher price can signify there's a shortage. So what does that incentivise? It incentivises it might be a case where the consumer shops elsewhere, so that they're not overspending on a particular, item that is scarce, right? Because resources are scarce. Or let's say, for example, the resource isn't as scarce. It can incentivise the producer to produce more in order to bring the price down. And what you tend to find is that, over time, the price drops. And you even find that when you go from like summer and you move into the winter, the autumn and then winter period, the summer clothing begins to drop in price. This is, what happens. Prices fluctuate in the marketplace. So anyway, I could go on a whole tangent about that because it's complex, and it's not as simple as just someone staring at something and saying, oh, they're so greedy, they just rammed up the price. But like I said, this particular individual is ignoring the many countless other options out there that has actually benefited to people's material standards of living.